Hey gang, it is Luke here with my co-conspirators Frankie
Hi.
and Tennant.
Ahoy!
And we've been hanging out in the negotiations today, right? And also having side chats with unnamed negotiators from unnamed countries. You could probably guess who we were talking to. But anyway, yes, we've got news because there's been developments. Where are we? Day three.
Day 3.
It's Wednesday.
And so having sort of resolved the agenda, things are actually moving. Where do we want to start, gang?
I know where I want to start. Why don't you start with the big thing that people are mostly talking about here?
And everybody actually cares about.
I contest that very much.
But net collective quantified goal. We woke up this morning to news reports that the G77 plus China just had looked at the framework text that we talked about a couple of episodes ago in the Let Me Sum Up podcast, which was a forest of brackets, like nothing was really resolved, but there was something to work with. News reports this morning, G77 plus China thought it was rubbish. Chuck it out, start again, blank whiteboard, let's all go from there. But Frankie, I understand that there has been developments today on that exact topic.
There have. So not long ago, I came out of a meeting of that working group, which is, as we have said previously, co-chaired by Australia. I can't remember the name of the lead negotiator. We should
We'll
add
circle
that
back
into
to that.
the comments later. But the group reconvened early this evening, I guess. It took me ages to get into the overflow room, so this isn't the room with the actual negotiators. This is like...
I will say I bailed.
Yeah.
Luke is weak. Frankie is steel.
Frankie is truly committed. I went back to the OzPav and did some emails. But Frankie, that's why you've got the hot goss.
I persevered and I eventually weaseled my way into the overflow room and sat on the floor. And it was a little bit of an anti-climax in one sense, but also there's some very clear directions. So we've talked about the framework text that was worked on in the lead up to COP. And so, with what Luke's talked about and the G77 basically saying, we don't want to use this as a starting point for negotiations at this COP.
Yep.
Overnight, the co-chairs received, I think it was 21 submissions from parties, and they've coupled that all together into a first draft of a text, which is 34 pages long. I hadn't seen it prior to sitting in this session, but the opening intervention in the meeting was from the G77 plus China, and I think in a really welcome development. They said, we appreciate the enormous work that it would have taken the co-chairs basically through the middle of the night to produce this text that was available to parties this morning ahead of the meeting. And said that they're happy to engage on the basis of the text that's been provided, but they noted that it needs to be significantly streamlined, and they asked the co-chairs to preside over, basically a redraft and the production of a refined text tomorrow morning for the group to reconsider. So that, I guess I was sort of spoiling for some spicier interventions on this, given what the reporting was. But because that was such a constructive opening, every other major party that made interventions after that basically backed it in. So I took notes. They were followed by the EIG grouping, Norway, the EU, Canada, and the UK. Who all said the same things, really appreciate the significant work of co-chairs overnight, and we would love you, sorry to create more work for you, but we'd love you to go and do that again tonight and come back with a refined
That's the kind of
version.
praise you think twice about the value of when you get it.
It's always funny to see diplomacy in action in a way, because clearly the work that the co-chairs did overnight was the result of some, pretty brutal feedback from the broader collective. And I think they're wanting to express appreciation for a lot of heavy lifting that would have needed to happen overnight to synthesize all of those submissions into something that could be looked at. And they're saying you're on the right track now, cut it down some more, and we can have a proper chat about it tomorrow.
Early crisis averted, some solid co-chairing there from UAE and Australia.
That's right.
So that was one negotiating drama. What was the other negotiating drama that was exercising your interest today, Lieutenant?
Well, so I went and observed the Forum on Response Measures, which is...
Sounds boring.
You'd be wrong. That is the place, traditionally, where oil-producing countries complain about how terrible it would be if people stopped buying their oil and how they really ought to be compensated for that.
Because if there's one group at this COP that deserves to be compensated, it's oil producers.
Well, there's a lot of people who will agree with that. They're all oil producers. However, that's so 5 minutes ago. The new hotness is a kind of debate where the developed countries say this Forum on Response Measures should be about considering all the response measures on climate, their impacts on developed countries as well as developing countries, and the positive as well as the negative impacts of them. So, for instance, the health benefits of reduced consumption of fossil fuels leading to less respiratory illness in all kinds of places. The developing countries broadly are saying, hold on, that's not what the real vibe of this thing is about. This is about developed countries' negative impacts on developing countries.
Yeah.
And the most important thing to discuss in that context now is unilateral climate-related trade measures.
What the hell is that, Lieutenant?
That's CBAM.
What?
Oh dear.
CBAM?
And some other stuff as well.
Yeah.
And really this whole argument right now is heavily shaped by should CBAM stuff and complaints about it be on the agenda for this forum in future in its work program that's being decided, or not? Is it being adequately discussed over at the WTO? So to be determined where that goes, but there were a lot of different views, although very orderly procedure inside that forum. It almost ran to time, and nobody was actually like chucking shoes at each other.
And effectively, there's a whole bunch of developing countries super concerned about the European CBAM, think that it's actually going to cruel their trade opportunities. Tennant, do you feel like they're right about that?
I think that if everyone involved truly understood how CBAM works, they'd all get really calm and happy, and there would be some productive arguments to be had still about things like access to finance for developing countries to invest in the cleaner production that CBAMs in rich countries would make more viable in those countries. But that's not where heads are at right now.
It is not. It is not. But if there are any negotiators that wish to sit down or lay down on the couch with Professor Reid,
That's right.
My office is open.
We've just come from a networking event, which was the International Climate Council's network. So it was hosted by Australia at the Australia Pavilion, by our climate Change Authority, which Matt Keane chairs. He's been here at COP. And I was joking to Tennant earlier that he needs to set up an international organisation of CBAM enthusiasts.
you're on a bit of a kick on this because you're also telling me I need to set up an international organisation of energy efficiency councils.
It's like it's the vibe of the COP. I think there's one more bit of the negotiating story that we should touch on from today, and that was out of the outcomes and implementation of the global stocktake conversation.
Yep.
What's the formal name for that?
Procedural matters concerning the UAE Consensus on the global stocktake, or something like that.
So that was the one that was subject to some argy-bargy around the agenda setting, right?
Yes.
So there were it sort of took over the first.
Including argy-bargy over whether CBAM, sorry, unilateral climate-related trade measures should be on it.
That's right. But so the argy-bargy over the agenda included whether, like it was sort of a piece around scope. So what are we going to be able to talk about when we consider GST outcomes? And there are blocks of negotiating parties and countries that really just want this thing focused on finance only.
Yeah.
And other parties that want to be able to focus on gaps in ambition, gaps in implementation, and to be able to talk about that as well. And one of the things that came up today when we were observing that negotiation as well. So, and is it worth kind of touching on, who's involved here? It's like the finance only group is kind of led by what's the Arab group.
And the like-minded
LMDCs.
developing countries, Saudi Arabia, China, India, and Bolivia, most prominent among them.
And then you've got, other groups, like including the one that Australia participates in the Umbrella Group,
Yep.
And others that want kind of a more fulsome consideration of the GST in this dialogue. But one of the other things that came up that was sort of relevant to all of this as well is the next global stocktake,
Yes.
which is due in 2028.
2028.
And the timing of the next IPCC assessment report.
Yeah.
And I guess it's not something you typically expect to see a huge amount of coverage of.
Indeed.
Here necessarily, but
We may be it.
yeah, maybe. But because, I think it was sort of almost a freak coincidence that the AR6, the sixth assessment report, was produced in almost like a perfect timing.
Yeah, it fed in really well.
Yeah, it really aligned well with the timing of the first global stocktake. So the report came out through 2021, 22, and then the GST was obviously the end of 23. So it was sort of really nicely sequenced. But the next global stocktake is due to happen in 2028.
Yep.
And on the kind of current time frame for IPCC reports, and the seventh assessment report would see it start to be kind of released in 2028,
Yeah.
basically. So it's not leaving that much time for that, the most authoritative kind of summary of the science to be produced and available for consideration in
And
the
actually
next GST.
integrated into the thinking.
Yeah, and there's some argy-bargy about that too.
Yes.
Yep.
There's no shortage of argy-bargy
There's
here
no.
in Baku.
All right. I think that's they're the headlines of negotiations from day 3 here at Baku, Azerbaijan, COP29. We'll be back tomorrow with more, no doubt. But until then, catch you later.